Hi there, my name is Kenley, and this is Scales by Ken. I love this dude so much. So today's video is going to be talking about chameleons, and we're actually going to be talking about building trust with your chameleon. So I've had Marvin about 3 or 4 months now, so not a whole lot of time, but I feel like I've developed a lot of trust between me and him. And as you may know, chameleons are not super handleable pets, but I do think that it's achievable to build a relationship with them where you can hold them, you can give them some enrichment outside of their enclosure. I also do believe that there's a lot of different personalities when it comes to chameleons, and it's really just luck of the draw. So if you're wanting a chameleon that's super handleable, it really just depends on their personalities. You know, you could do absolutely every form of developing trust with your chameleon, and it may still not work. I somehow got lucky with a chameleon that actually does want to come out of the enclosure a lot of the times, but there are plenty of times where he wants absolutely nothing to do with me. So in today's video, I'm going to tell you how I developed trust with my chameleon to the point where now he asks to come out of the enclosure. So the first thing I'd like to go over with you are going to be seeing signs of stress and when to know when to stop. I would say you never really want to absolutely stop trying to develop trust with your chameleon, but there are times that you do want to kind of stop a session and let them kind of have their space, let them feel safe and secure without you all up kind of in their face and just stressing them out. A lot of signs of stress that I've seen would be being a very dull color or being an extremely light color. So as you know, they'll kind of change their colors here and there. And for example, I'll insert a photo of Marvin's resting colors. So when Marvin is really dark or extremely bright, that tells me sometimes that he might be a little bit stressed. Another sign I see is whenever they're hugging their bodies really close to the branch and kind of trying to make themselves seem really small. Or times whenever they puff up, they'll puff up their chin, they'll spread open their back and their belly, and that tells you that they're very defensive, right? Which can come from stress. Definitely be looking for these signs whenever you're developing trust with your chameleon, because I would say when they start showing these signs, that is a sign to you that we should back off. So I've only had Marvin for about 4 months now. It's been kind of a journey to developing trust with him, but even in that short amount of time, I've developed enough trust with him where he will actually come to the front of the enclosure whenever he wants to come out. So I'd first preface this by saying if you've just gotten a chameleon and you're just now getting into the process of trying to develop, trust between you and your cam, the first thing that I would do, especially when you bring them home, is number one, make sure their enclosure is all set up properly. I have plenty of videos on that. And number two, one thing that I did that I think helped a lot was that I still noticed Marvin was stressed, especially with a new environment change, and I actually covered the front of his enclosure with like a towel so that you couldn't see in and he couldn't see out. So I feel like this made him feel a little bit more secure. I noticed whenever he would be in his enclosure with a towel covering the front that he wouldn't show as many signs of being super dark or just super bright. He kind of was staying around his neutral, chill colors. I left that on the front of the enclosure for about 2 weeks. A lot of times what I did is I would have the towel on the front of the enclosure, and then whenever I was home or maybe for like an hour or two, I would take it off, so he could kind of transition to being away from that cover in the front. So after I took the towel off the front of the enclosure, that's whenever I transitioned into actually building trust with my chameleon. So as we know, chameleons are tree dwellers, and I feel like they feel most safe when they are above you. So as you can see, I've been holding Marvin for a total of 10 seconds and he's already trying to kind of climb up high. So they feel a lot safer when you are below them. So a lot of times when you're building this trust, I would say position yourself where the cam is above you and he's looking down to you. So our first goal in here is to get the chameleon used to you, get the chameleon used to your presence. And the way that I found best to achieve this was to honestly just sit myself down in front of the enclosure. So I would literally just sit on a pillow on the floor in front of his enclosure. I would have the door closed and I would just scroll on my phone for maybe 30 minutes to an hour. And that way he can see me and he can see that I'm doing no harm to him, right? And so I did this for about a week or two, and then I transitioned to doing the same thing, but with the enclosure door open. So it gave me a little bit more direct access to him, but he could still see that I'm just chilling here. I'm not here to harm him. I'm not here to hurt him. And I could tell through his behavior that he was getting more and more used to it. So instead of shrinking himself down to be as close to the branch as possible, he would maybe move around the enclosure a little bit. He would always keep his eyes on me, but he started coming out of his shell a little bit more, if that makes sense. So, and then from there, I would sit in front of his enclosure and I would sit with my hand inside the enclosure. So he would be, you know, way up high, and I would just stick my hand on one of the lower branches and I would just chill like that. One hand hold my phone, just scrolling, and then the next it would just be hanging out in the enclosure. And I did this for maybe 3 or 4 days. It was so random. He literally just saw me. I guess the thought came into his head, and then he just made his way down and then climbed onto my arm, which I'll insert a little clip here. It was literally the best feeling ever. I will always remember it. It felt like he trusted me. It felt like he didn't see me as a danger. So it was such a nice feeling. And then whenever he kind of showed signs of being a little bit more scared, I gave him the option to go back in the enclosure, and he went back in easy enough. So I'm also a really big advocate for choice-based handling. So what this means is basically giving the animal or the reptile the option of whether or not they'd like to be handled. So I highly believe in this process, especially for chameleons, which are so particular and get stressed super easily. I feel like choice-based handling is always the best option when it comes to these guys. So I will never force Marvin to come out of the enclosure. It is always choice-based. And Kinley, what does choice-based look like when handling? So I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate. All I'm gonna do is offer Marvin my hand. I'm just gonna put it kind of in front of him where he can see it, and then it's close enough where he can reach. And I offer this to him with my hand kind of out like this and kind of at an angle, which makes it seem like something he's climbing up. And the first time you do this, they're gonna move super slow. You're gonna be like, come on, dude, like, let's do this. He's just doing what feels safe to him, so we'll just give him the time to kind of adjust. And just like that, he allows me to hold him. So he's not one to really chill on my hand. He'll kind of want to run around a little bit, but you can see he's kind of keeping close to my arm a little bit, and his colors aren't super dark, right? They're a little bit darker than resting, so he might be a little bit like, I don't know about this, but overall he's not terrified, right? So I really only handle him for maybe at most an hour before I put him back in his enclosure. What I also found to be a good practice was to attach a vine, not a mossy vine, that extends out of his enclosure, goes through some of these live plants, and then it goes kind of across the room. So he has the option to come out of his enclosure without me physically taking him out. And you really want to be careful because they'll hold on to the branch with their tail. You definitely don't want to yank on their tail or anything like that. And just kind of sitting here hanging around with him honestly develops the most trust. I definitely think it's important for these guys to get some enrichment outside of their enclosures, especially because like Marvin has a 2x2x4. I can't wait to upgrade him to a larger enclosure, but for now, that's what fits in my home, and that's plenty of space for him, right? But I do believe it's important for them to get some enrichment outside of the enclosure. So for example, I also think it's very beneficial for chameleons to get natural sunlight, right? That natural UVB. And so I strongly believe in taking our chameleons outside, right? Now there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. After developing trust with your chameleon, kind of get him used to you holding him and walking around a little bit, right? Because that can take a little bit. I remember the first time I took Marvin outside, he was very scared of doors opening and closing, and he made that very clear, right? He opened up his mouth and puffed up his throat, kind of puffed up a little bit. But once we got outside and I kind of just sat down outside in the sun and let him just kind of soak up a lot of that sun, this is what he looked like, right? So he looked super happy. He's in his resting colors. He's getting some natural sunlight. I had him outside for about maybe 20 minutes or so, and then came back in and gave him the choice to go back in his enclosure. You will definitely be able to tell whenever your chameleon wants to go back in the enclosure. And I always want to encourage you to, if you see those signs from your chameleon, don't keep them out of the enclosure. Don't stress them out more than they need to be stressed out. Give them that option to go back in. And the last thing I want to say is that we talked about some signs of stress, but I also want to say if you have your chameleon out of the enclosure and you're holding them and everything seems great and all of a sudden they kind of scoot down against your arm, kind of showing they're a little bit scared, and they close their eyes, this is a very bad sign. This is a sign that they are so scared and so stressed out that their bodies are starting to shut down. So this is absolutely the time that we put them back in the enclosure, probably cover it up and leave them alone for at least a week, because that is the ultimate sign of stress. That is the ultimate sign of something being wrong. We definitely don't want to do anything detrimental to our chameleon's health. So I really hope that you enjoyed this short little video on how to build trust with your chameleon. I'm definitely trying a little bit more practices here and there, but I feel like I've made a lot of progress with just my chameleon Marvin. And I wanted to share that with you guys because not a whole lot of people talk about building trust with them. A lot of people just tell you that they absolutely can't be handled. And I don't believe in that ideology at all. I find Marvin to be very happy exploring and everything outside of his enclosure, and actually to the point where he will hang on the screen when he wants to come out. Definitely work towards it. It's a goal, it's a process, it's definitely not an overnight thing, but if you put your mind to it, I believe it can be achieved. Again, chameleons are gonna have different personalities, so please keep that in mind. And of course, anytime you see signs of stress, definitely give them the option to go back in. I'd love to answer any more questions that you may have about this, and I'll of course update you on this journey if I find any other tips and tricks in order to do so. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.